Want to thank you all for being on today. My name is Patrick Davis. I work with MU Extension as a livestock specialist down in Stockton, Missouri, Cedar County and Cover counties in the Southwest area. And I'll be the host today. Our co-host today will be Jim Humphrey, and he's a livestock field specialist up in the northwest part of the state, and he's actually changed his name to Ask Questions Here, and we'll discuss the reasoning behind that here in a little bit. But again, I want to thank you for being on today. Also, this, in addition to the Zoom, this is being simulcasted through YouTube, and so in future town halls, if you want to get involved that way as well, here's the link for doing that through the MU IPM YouTube page, and also you can go to that page and look at previous town halls that we've had and previous videos, clips from those town halls. And so I encourage you to do that if you're interested, and go to that page and look at the various town halls we've had in the past. As I mentioned earlier, Jim Humphreys changed his name to Ask Questions Here, and this is the reason for that. So as we go through the day, if you have any questions or anything, our best way to field those questions is to put those in the chat, and the chat button should be in the center of your screen. Mine's actually on the top, but it can be on the bottom as well. But there will be a chat button there, and periodically people will put stuff in the chat as well. But if you have any questions or anything, click on the chat button, and we'll click on a drop-down menu, and that drop-down menu will have a Ask Questions Here, which is our co-host Jim Humphrey, and you can send those questions directly to him, and he will ask those questions during the presentation for you. And so, like I said, have any questions or anything, that's the best way for us to handle those today during the Zoom. So moving along here, our agenda today, we're going to have Pat Guinan give us a weather report. And then after that, Anthony Ohmes, who is a MU Extension field specialist in agronomy, is going to talk about weed control and forages. And so with that, Pat, are you ready? Pat is the Associate Extension Professor of Climatology, Atmospheric Sciences with MU Extension, and he's going to provide us with a weather report.
I am, Patrick. Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. It's been a busy morning and afternoon for a good portion of Missouri, and it's all weather related. But just a really quick update. This is our last week of May. Next week, when we meet, we'll be in the month of June. So I always like to look back to see where we've been. The numbers are on the upper left, show this will be a below average month for the month of May. Had a little bit of warm up over the past week, but that's not going to counter what we've experienced most of the month with below normal temperatures. You can see as of up to May 1st to the 27th, temperatures are generally running 1 to 3 degrees below normal. Ignore this orange dot right here. That's some bad data coming out of Randolph counties, but nonetheless, it's a below normal month. The upper right shows all the Mays since 1895. On the far right, you can see here 2021, very similar, almost identical to what we experienced last May. We had a cool May last year, and the numbers are reflecting, looking at the next 4 days, I think they'll be about 2 degrees below normal for the month of May. Of course, that's all preliminary data. Things will change, but I think we're in the ballpark. We'll average about 2 degrees below normal for the month of May of 2021. And again, as I mentioned, most of the days we've seen so far for the month have been below normal. On the bottom chart here, I used Columbia as a midpoint for the state to show the high and low temperatures for 2021. That's in pink for max temperature. The light blue are min temperatures, and then the averages in the orange and dark blue. And you can see how many days we had below normal throughout much of the month. We had a little bit of a warm spell over the past week. Minimum temperatures have been very elevated over the past 7 to 10 days. That's because we've seen so much rain day to day. We had a lot of cloudiness. We've had a lot of showers over the past 10 days. And that kept those minimum temperatures elevated and running well above normal, generally in the low to mid 60s. And so that's where we saw most of our warmth for the month was on minimum temperatures. This is the forecast over the next few days. You're going to see temperature after today. Temps are going to take a nosedive with high temperatures averaging below normal through the end of the month, starting tomorrow and on into Memorial Day, which will be the last day of the month. Precipitation wise, on the upper left, you can see these are the radar estimates for May 1st to the 27th. Anything in those reds are going to be above normal precip pretty much, or more than 5 inches. Look at right here in Southwest Missouri, northwestern Greene County, southwestern Polk, parts of southeastern Lawrence County. They've had over 10 inches of rain. So very wet conditions across a good portion of Southwest Missouri, especially west central sections. A little bit drier in east central parts, especially around the St. Louis, where they're actually running below normal, only about 1.5 inches to 2 inches. But obviously, things are going to change with the ongoing rain showers today that will enhance those totals somewhat. Upper right shows below the departure from normal precip. It's wet, obviously, in west central Southwest Missouri. A little bit drier, but I put dry in quotes because generally things are looking good for soil moisture. In fact, saturated for that matter. There's no drought whatsoever impacting our state because of these wet conditions. The map on the right, on the bottom, a little bit to the right here, shows actually totals using Missouri Mesonet data. We can see some of the rainfall totals since midnight through about 15 minutes ago. Some of the biggest totals I see here in Grundy County, over 1 inch near Trenton, 1.5 inches here in Butler and Bates County, 3/4 of an inch here in Green Ridge and southwestern Pettis County. And those numbers are only going to increase as we go through the day, with rainfall still occurring over parts of the state. Soil temperatures have rebounded nicely with these warmer weather conditions over the past week. These are the 2-inch average soil temperatures on the far left, generally running in the low to mid 70s across the state. You can see this middle image, the red, shows that increasing trend of our soil temps over the past 10 days. We're actually running above normal. The blue line is the average 2-inch soil temperature over a 21-year period, and we've been above normal over the past week or so. On the right, those are the soil temperatures as of about a half hour ago. They've been generally running in the mid 60s, low 70s. Of course, more sunshine. The rains haven't reached southeast Missouri, and so they've actually rebounded well into the upper 70s, even low 80s in the Boot Heel. So I think the big weather story for the day is obviously the weather. We have severe weather impacting parts of the state. The upper left is the radar image taken about 20 minutes ago. You can see where the heavy rains are. These deeper colors here impacts heavy to even severe thunderstorms impacting around the St. Louis area, parts of southwest Missouri. We also have reports of severe weather with severe thunderstorms and some very heavy rain, a little bit of a pocket of moderate rain right here in mid-Missouri. The bottom left shows all sorts of watches, warnings, and advisories. I will note that just within the past few minutes, this area in pink that you've seen, that is a severe thunderstorm watch that is in effect until 7 p.m. this evening. So these orange colors are severe thunderstorm warnings. So we already have severe weather warnings for parts of it right around the St. Louis area, parts of southwest Missouri. There's a few counties where some potentially severe thunderstorms are impacting these areas. So something to keep an eye on as we go through the course of the day. I think the highest potential, at least according to the Storm Prediction Center, for severe weather will be across about the southern half of the state. Any areas that are currently where the sun is out, where the temperatures are in the upper 70s or lower 80s, that signifies a very unstable air mass and the potential for more severe weather to develop. And that looks like that best likelihood will be over the southern half of the state. These greens are indicative of flash flood warnings in the bright red, and then flash flood watches across much of southeast Kansas, Oklahoma, parts of northwest Arkansas, and then much of southwest Missouri. We already seen flash flooding in west central Missouri. So again, flash flooding, again, that's the natural hazard that leads to the most fatalities when it comes to drownings and flash flooding versus other straight line wind events or tornadoes. So pay close attention to where we have these flood advisories and ongoing flood warnings as we go through the course of the day. I've consolidated a lot of river information resources, looking at various watersheds here in Missouri. The web link on the bottom right will take you to this resource, and you can get the latest flash flood information, the flood outlooks for throughout the state, looking at various river basins. And please feel free to check out that website on the bottom right. Well, that'll take you to these river information resources. We do have a strong cold front that is sweeping through the state later today and tonight, which will usher in much cooler conditions for our holiday weekend starting tomorrow. Look at these high temperatures on the upper left here. Highs not even getting into the 60s across northern Missouri. That's more typical of early April versus the end of May. So some very cool conditions tomorrow. Highs again in the upper 50s to lower 60s. That's about 15 to 20 degrees below normal statewide. That we will get some moderating, but still below normal temperatures as we go into Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. Very pleasant, a very nice weekend, Memorial Day weekend shaping up. I think our best weather days will be on Saturday and Sunday. Clear skies, low humidities, highs generally in the upper 60s to lower 70s across the state, and no chances of precipitation. There are indications that another system may perhaps impact western Missouri as we go into Memorial Day, but a little bit warmer temperatures also as well. And look at the low temperatures over the next 4 days. Generally getting down into the 40s across northern Missouri for 3 consecutive mornings. The statewide low temperatures will be in the 40s Saturday morning. So some very cool conditions with our minimum temperatures and a little bit of moderation on Memorial Day morning with lows in the mid 50s. This is the forecast on the left over the next 24 hours. Again, some significant precip impacting Missouri, generally 1 to as much as 2 inches anticipated across our state. A little bit lighter where the cooler air is starting to make its entrance and less instability. So only 1/4 to maybe a 1/2 inch in northwest Missouri. I think though things are winding down for much of the state, but we need to pay attention to the southeastern half of Missouri where this heavy rain could perhaps continue over the next 12 to 18 hours. Another system by next week, by Memorial Day, and as we get into on Tuesday, this is another system they're forecast a notable heavy system that could impact the central and southern plains. And obviously that will translate eastward as we go later into the week. So we'll need to keep an eye on for the potential of more heavy rain impacting Missouri by mid to late week next week. This is a forecast that will take us right into the month of June for next week, June 1st through 5th. Those blues are indicative of a higher likelihood of below normal temperatures, the highest likelihood across Texas. That blue shades extend into all of Missouri, so it does look like below normal temperatures will continue, not only as we go into the weekend, but for much of the next week. I would say highs next week would probably be in the 70s, lows in the 50s. So some very pleasant conditions considering we're going into the first week of June. Precipitation may be enhanced likelihoods of above normal precip across the southern U.S. That impacts southern Missouri. A little bit more drier conditions anticipated across the north central, northwest U.S., and that clips northwest Missouri. So please pay attention to the severe weather opportunities or potential today, and of course the heavy rain and flash flooding potential. That's pretty much a weather wrap up, Patrick. I'll hand it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat, and thank you for that weather report. With that, we're going to move on, and Anthony Ohmes, who's an agronomy specialist with MU Extension, he's going to talk about pasture management and weeds, and so with that, Anthony.
Yeah, well, thank you, Patrick. Thanks, Jim. Appreciate Town Hall team for inviting me today. As Patrick said, my name is Anthony Ohmes. I'm a field specialist in agronomy. My location is in southeast Missouri, so my office is actually in Cape Girardeau County. So in southeast Missouri, we have a pretty diverse range of field crops and forage crops that our producers work with daily. And so I've been asked today to kind of cover weed management in pastures. And a lot of times when I get a call, it's that that woolly mess that's out there in the pasture, something's gotten away from them, and what's the fix to take care of that. In a lot of cases, with weeds, it's not something that in most cases occurred overnight. It's things that build, that weed seed bank builds over time. And so my talk today is really more of, what are some of the reasons why, what are some of the management things and the philosophy and just the overall picture of weed management in a pasture setting or a hay setting that maybe we can evaluate and then manage those weeds. Because there's a lot of good resources out there, which I'll reference and talk about to identify a weed and to choose a particular product to control that weed, and that might vary from one producer's field to another. So anyway, there's different things that we can look at and go through. So with that, we'll just move through. First thing to think about is with weeds that they're opportunists. And when I talk about pasture management, and when I look at a field, what are some holes in the system that might be allowing weeds to come through? Because again, weeds, they need sunlight, they need light to germinate, they need an open area to be competitive. And so a lot of cases, it boils down to maybe a field's being overgrazed, maybe the pH or the fertility is off a little, and all those things reduce the competition of that forage plant. And then in addition to that, maybe it's misidentification of the weed, misplacement of the or timing of the herbicide or the wrong herbicide for that particular weed. So those also can compound the problem of weed management and weeds taking over a pasture. Weeds, as we all know, they compete. Why we don't want them in our field is, they compete for water, nutrients, and light. But also they can be, toxic to our livestock, or there's some weeds that, livestock are just going to avoid. And so those are going, if they're allowed to persist, produce more seed and spread either through seed or through rhizomes or whatever. So there's a lot of thoughts and ways to manage weeds, and a lot of these are incorporated on all of our farms. But your three basic management of weeds incorporates cultural practices, mechanical control, and then chemical control. And so with that, there's four basic components that we can look at that identify, cultural, mechanical, and chemical control methods. And the number one component to any weed management plan is to have good competitive forage, starting with a good grass base, and then integrating other forage species in there. But again, a nice thick stand of healthy forages is a great competitive tool. As you can see with that picture, blocking any light from penetrating through to allow those seeds of weeds to germinate. So again, a good competitive stand of grass or forage is the first step. And so a lot of times when we evaluate a field, what's missing, is that grass just gone? Is it died out, been overgrazed? Is it just really struggling because of the nutrients or the pH? So the first thing usually I talk to the producer about is, have you had a soil test? So that's one of the first things to think about is, where are we in our soil, our fertility and pH of that particular field. And so there's research out there. Dr. Kevin Bradley and his team did some research back a few years ago, looking at a 46 pasture survey. And another good tool, reference tool to utilize is videos. And our weed science department also has great video education out there. And so that link there is to this particular study where they found that 80% of those 46 pasture survey were classified as low to very low in phosphorus, and 37% were classified as low to very low in potassium. And so what the results found is that as they increased each part per million in phosphorus, they had 62 fewer weeds per acre. And each part per million increase in potassium, they had 12 fewer weeds per acre. And also they found that, those soils that had a low pH, an increase in pH also reduced overall weed density per acre. So again, starting with the basics, soil test, see where we are in that field, and maybe one of the reasons why maybe weeds are getting that competitive advantage. The other component to weed management really is good grazing, and rotational grazing has been a proven system to provide forages that competitive edge. There's a really good, when Patrick and Jim were talking about referencing the previous town hall videos. Valerie Tate had a great presentation on the flexible forage systems and forage growth. And so there's a lot of good information out there on how to manage your grazing system to give your grasses and your forages the most competitive advantage. Now, there are exceptions to weed management, and where you may have to control that weed because it's just taking over and it's a risk to your livestock, and that's maybe poisonous weeds or some woody perennials that are difficult to control through grazing or good, healthy stand of competitive grass. So you may have to use a chemical or mechanical control to provide some kind of management there. The third component is timely mowing. Mowing can be an effective tool in addition to grazing for that weeds. However, you always want to weigh out the cost to benefit as a weed management tool, because mowing could be an expensive venture, and sometimes can have some outcomes that can cost more than maybe the chemical control option. But again, mowing is an option. It can help reduce seed production, especially with annuals and some biennials. So again, if you have those escapes out there and you want to hit them before they go to seed, then quick mowing might do that. It can also sometimes weaken perennial weeds, as multiple mowings in some cases have shown to reduce perennial root systems. However, you want to be cautious with that as well, because in some cases, such as with blackberries, mowing before chemical control in the same year can actually reduce that control of that blackberries if we're deciding to use a chemical means to control them. So sometimes mowing can have a negative impact on weed control. And then the fourth component is herbicide applications. Many cases, herbicides are the quick way to shift the competitive edge back to pastures. And so that's sometimes the cheapest means to do that. And a lot of times can be more effective than mowing. But basically, bottom line there is, and a lot of calls I get is I want to spray something to control all my broadleaves, but I don't want to hurt my clover. And so you've got to decide if the weeds are taking over and they're got that competitive edge, and the herbicide is what's going to knock them back. An effective mode of action is going to knock them back. It's probably going to take out your legumes or make them thinned out. So again, you have to make that decision, but a lot of times there are, good options in the herbicide product for controlling a lot of our broadleaf, perennial, and annual and biennial weeds. And when we look at cattle response to grazing, fields that have been treated for weed management, the weeds have been controlled versus uncontrolled. There's a great study that again Kevin Bradley and his team did several years ago, and there's another video on this one as well. But again, looking at over time, part of the field, a continuous grazing field, part was sprayed to control the weeds, the other part was untreated. And over 4 months, the cattle equipped with GPS receivers basically chose to be in the treated part of the field because, again, probably more palatable, more forage that was suited for them was available compared to more weeds and things that they were avoiding in the other area. So again, weed management, is going to also affect grazing response. So when we think about, weed management and we dial in on herbicides, what are some areas that, we'd see program failures? And so this is where I was talking about earlier, where you walk out into the field and you try to identify what might have gone wrong. So first of all, there was a great article written several years ago by the Noble group that was talking about weed control programs. And it was kind of a witty, lighthearted way of looking at program failures. But again, one of the things that 6 of the things that they mentioned in there are just true weed science principles is, misidentification of the weed, application timing, are you spraying too early, too late, wrong product or product placement, Poor environmental conditions. Is it a drought? Is it super wet, rainfall? I mean, immediately after application, what are the environmental conditions? Not calibrating. Poor coverage, wrong rate applied. So calibration is very important in weed management if we're going to use a herbicide. And then reading the label. This probably should be number one. We should always read and follow the label. But reading the label is a very important component to weed management because, again, the label is going to direct you on exactly what you need to use and how to use it. But I'm going to dial in a little deeper just today on 1 and 2, which is basically misidentification of the weed and application timing. Weed ID, we can spend hours just going through every weed that there's out there and potentially in a pasture and talking about their features and characteristics, but I just don't have that kind of time. So really what I want to direct you to is the most important thing with really IPM in any crop is getting out there and scouting, and not just once or twice, but, weekly, or if not, every other day, just getting out in the field, knowing your field, knowing how your forages are doing, and then what weeds are coming up when. And so, scouting is really a fundamental foundation to good weed management. The other thing that we need to have is good resources. One of the best ones that is a tangible, something you can have in your vehicle and in your hand, is the Weed and Brush Control IPM 1031 guide. This is a great pictorial guide with all the pictures for ID. There's also in our MU Weed Science website, there's a Weed ID guide. There's also a Weed ID app for your phones. So again, there's a lot of resources for weed identification. The nice thing about the booklet here that I've shown a picture of is towards the back of that book, it also has products and how they work on particular weeds. Are they fair, poor, good, etc. So there's a lot of good resources available for weed ID and picking a product that matches up with that weed. The other thing with identification is, it's key to know what type of weed we have, and what is the emergent weed window. What's the growth habit? Is it a woody? Is it a broadleaf? Is it a grass? Is it, prostrate to the ground? What's it doing? Waxy leaves, etc. So what's the growth habit? What type of weed is it? And then, is there a label herbicide? Making sure on that herbicide label, that particular weed that we've identified is there and as labeled as something that it will control. So with that, there's a lot of research. Again, Dr. Bradley's done a lot of surveying research. And so we can kind of boil it down to the big two in our pastures and a lot of our field crops, as well as broadleaves. And so broadleaves, so both annual and perennial, are our big two in pastures, followed by grasses, a distant third. So again, our big two are our annual broadleaves and perennial broadleaves that we find as predominant weed types. And if we look at that seasonal distribution of weeds across pastures, there was a survey that was done on 63 pastures over a couple of years. And so that survey looked at, what are all the overall density and what's that density made up of? And so as you can see, over the course of April through September, again, your two dominant would be, your broadleaves, annual and perennial, being your top your highest density weeds, with densities increasing to maintaining a steady for perennial from that May to September timeframe. So again, getting out of the field, looking before weeds come up. So that's the beginning of the year. I mean, we have, winter annuals, you have biennials that'll bolt in the spring. So there's timings that, not just the summer months, going into this next month is a good time to look for, those summer annuals and managing some perennials maybe, but again, getting out year round to identify and manage those weeds. Some of the most common weeds found in Missouri pastures from more work from Dr. Bradley is, looking at our top 10, and probably some of the ones that, I get calls on more are just your horse nettle, perennials such as ironweed, horse nettle, Also, foxtails, one of those we'll talk about briefly here towards the end. But again, and then other annuals. And so these are some of the things that can be grazed, and many of those will be avoided. So with that, just identifying the weed, knowing what are some more common ones that you might find, but nothing replaces, again, just getting out and looking at your field and identifying what you have in your particular field. And that leads us to, once we identified the weed, we've figured out, okay, this weed is what I have. It's in that, right application window. So what is that best window or timing to spray? Well, first of all, what's the herbicide label say? A lot of times they'll have a weed height or a stage of development on that label. In general, the general rule for annuals is, small, actively growing in the vegetative stage. Some for perennials, it depends on the species. Some species, it's better to apply when they're actively growing. Some it's better to apply in the fall prior to a frost to kind of make that systemic herbicide move into the perennial root system. So it just depends on the product and depends on the weed for perennials. But again, knowing your weeds and then knowing what best matches up and having those resources, either books or something online, or your local extension agronomist, all those resources can help you maybe develop a plan for your annuals and perennials. The application timing, again, is definitely a critical thing to think about. What species are you targeting? Are you targeting a biennial, weed that's going to bolt in the spring, such as a thistle, or a perennial that bolts in the spring, such as a buttercup? Or are we looking at summer annuals, such as common ragweed or pigweed or croton or cocklebur? Are we dealing with grasses, such as a foxtail? So all these weeds can have variable emergence windows, and they can vary from year to year, a little bit earlier, a little bit later, from the north to the south, and just depending on weather and so forth. So again, this is just a ballpark of just average emergent window for these type of weeds. And so for our summer ones, it's basically that May through September timeframe. But again, scouting is the foundation, and so you're not going to really know until you get out and look at those fields. So really, the other thing that I was just going to mention today is just some more recent questions that agronomists across the state and myself have had, and that's the Proclova, which is still pending EPA approval, herbicide impregnated fertilizer, and then foxtails. Kind of seem to be the three that have popped up in recent time. And so just some data from 2020 that Dr. Bradley has on the Proclova, looking at your injury to clover, white clover and Lespedeza is kind of where when you look at the Corteva's website, those are the two mentioned, as that flexibility option to control weeds with minimal to no injury to either your white clover or Lespedeza type legumes. However, with red clover, as you can see with this data there, we did see some injury, but again, less than what you would have seen with Crazon next door core, obviously, but again, some level of injury that probably is not acceptable. The other component here that is another cultural practice that Dr. Bradley has been looking at is electrocution of those weeds using like a weed zapper. So again, there's some videos and some information on the weed zapper as well on his website. But in this case, as far as overall injury, it was another cultural practice that didn't show injury. However, when we look at weed management, it may not be something that affects density at the end of the year. But when we look at the Proclova, that product is very comparable to our, kind of our standard Grazon Next and the newer Durachlor. So providing good control of annuals such as ragweed with reducing in density towards the end of the year. So again, that's very positive and good to see. And then perennials, some perennials it does a pretty good job on, such as ironweed. So again, but good control here a couple months after treatment. And then end of season, reducing that ironweed overall density. So again, good results for some perennials. However, there are some perennials and some biennials that may slip through Proclova. So again, just understanding what's going to work, and again, continued work and research is being done on these products. But some of the preliminary and some of the data that Dr. Bradley's collected here in 2020, coarse nettle density by the end of the season was still higher than compared to our standard product for horse nettle. And then musk thistle, again, density was, our control was a little bit lower than that of our standard again. But still pretty good compared to like electrocution or the non-treated. All right, so the other component that I'm just going to touch on is the impregnated fertilizer in Missouri, operating under the 2EE recommendation. So again, the three are Duracor, which is the newest added to that list, Grazon Next, and then Chaparral. So these are the currently 3 approved products for herbicide impregnated fertilizer. Again, that supplemental recommendation, you need to follow that, read it carefully, in addition to reading and following the label. And on that recommendation sheet, that supplemental 2EE, it's going to talk about application and getting that 100% overlap, because again, you want to hit the weeds where they are and provide good coverage of that area. And then also keep in mind with the herbicide impregnated fertilizer that that weed control is almost entirely dependent on plant root uptake. So the weeds need to be there. These products have residual activity to some degree, but again, it's not going to be season-long residual. So again, those weeds, target timing needs to be important. And also on the recommendation sheet, it'll say during normal fertilizer schedule for your grassland. So with that in mind, what is our normal, regular fertilizer applications, and how does that line up with certain weeds? Well, some weeds it's going to line up real well. Other weeds, it may not line up at all. So it depends on what you're targeting. So for spring applications, for example, of fertilizer, it may not target some of our later emerging summer broadleaves. However, the fall application of fertilizer or that August timeframe for application could, for stockpiling could provide some control of some later emerging summer weeds. So again, timing is everything. And so making sure the product lines up with what you're going to try to control. So bottom line with it is, always follow the restrictions on the herbicide label. Still, it's herbicide just on the fertilizer granule. So there are restrictions, follow the label. Also, if you're using your own equipment or using, a dealer's equipment, making sure if you're going from one field that's got clover and you're, don't want to use this product on to a field that's a grass monoculture, making sure the equipment, you're not getting any cross contamination. So, hopefully, you have designated equipment for, the impregnated fertilizer, because it could be one of those things to consider as contamination risk. With the fertilizer option, it does offer a one-pass system. So again, if the labeled target weeds are there and the fertilizing timing lines for best management practices, then it might be a good option. And it also may be able to get to some areas where a boom sprayer cannot. But again, timing is critical. There's early applications that may not provide the control when we're comparing to a broadcast application at a better timing when those weeds emerge. When we're comparing the fertilizer granule to a broadcast spray droplet, control ranges will depend on weed species, but in general, what Dr. Bradley has seen is it's slightly lower with the fertilizer granule. There's more research going on currently with this technology, and so hopefully we'll have more data to share with you in coming years. And then that last one that seems to pop up here more recent time is foxtail. So our foxtail is basically our annual warm season grasses. There's the yellow, giant, green type foxtails. They're prolific seed producers, and one of the issues with them, other than prolific seed production, is they have sharp awns that are coming off those seeds. And so in hay in particular, those awns could be a problem for our livestock in their gums. So that's something to keep in mind, and why management of them is a good plan. Yellow foxtail is again, as you remember back in that our top 10 weeds in pastures, it was one of the top 10 weeds in that survey. Some of the challenges, obviously, with a grass in a grass is emergence timing, and then identifying timing, making sure that we're finding this weed when it's in the vegetative stage, because most of the calls I get, or when the plant is brought into my office, it's already fully headed, it's got seed on it, and the awns are already there. So identifying it at the proper stage to maybe control and manage it is very important. The other challenge is the limited products for pure stands of cool season grass pastures and hay fields. So again, your pendimethalin is a option. It's sold under the trade name Pryl H2O. It's a true pre, and so again, it is being a true pre has to be out there prior to weed emergence. So scouting is very important. Identifying where those weeds, if you're not sure, again, getting help through weed ID guides or through local extension to help identify that vegetative stage. The other thing you could do is, if you noticed it, let's just say at the end of this year, you see those seed heads, you can GPS mark that spot or flag it off, and then go out there again now and start scouting with the Pryl or pendimethalin. We want to get those applications out prior to weed emergence. So again, this time of year, May, is a good time to consider putting that application out. In some cases, parts of the state, it may be later. That application may work. Post-emergent wise, there's quinclorac, which is sold under that Facedel trade name. It provides some residual and some post-activity on small, actively growing vegetative foxtail, but it's very expensive, and a lot of times, in cases it doesn't pencil out that well for control of the foxtail. So again, good management, improving forage density and competition. Research out of Dr. Bradley's group again has found that as fescue density increased, foxtail density decreased. So improving pH, nutrient availability through soil, again, going back to the old basic soil testing, see where you are there. Grazing management, all these things can help reduce foxtail density. And then again, in some cases, a timely application of either a pre, such as Pryl H2O or the pendimethalin product, and possibly a early post product. And then basically the bottom line with anything education-wise is just to stay informed. So, there's a lot of things that we could cover, a lot of things that I didn't cover, but, there's a lot of resources. And so I want, you all to be very aware of that our Weed Science group has a great website, great resources out there. There's a app for, again, Weed ID, Facebook, Twitter. There's a lot of different avenues for receiving your information. This YouTube channel is an excellent way to receive good information that you can go back to and listen to and utilize in the future. So with that, I'll take any questions I might be able to answer. I appreciate y'all having me on today, and I'll take it from there, Patrick.
Yep. Thank you, Anthony. Jim, is there any questions?
Yeah, I've got one. You talked about plants small. What do you mean by that? Is that 1 foot tall, 2 foot tall, 3 foot tall?
Yeah, so small, actively growing, annuals, when they're that small phase, basically we're looking at anywhere from 1 to 4 inch on most of our weeds. We can go up to 6, 8 inch on some weeds. So again, going back to that herbicide label, a lot of times they're going to be in a chart with a height range for that particular rate. So, I would say in a general rule, if we're targeting a 1 to 4 inch weed, that's going to be target. Now, some, again, perennials, it's going to be very different. I mean, Sericea, we might go all the way to pre-bloom and find good control with the right product. So with our annuals though, it's going to be that small actively growing. So when it's in that vegetative stage, 1 to 4, and in some cases you might be 4 to 6 to have some extra wiggle room. But if we're targeting 4 inches or less, we're going to get really good control.
Thank you. That's the only question I have at this time.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Thanks, Anthony, for that talk on weed control pasture management. Sure. Okay. Just as we wrap up here, I showed us again about the MUIPMU2 website, and Anthony mentioned it in his talk too. And we have a lot of archive videos there, of past town halls and video clips. And so if you're interested in learning more about those or seeing those, it'd be a good place to go, and the website's there as well. And again, we want to thank you all for being on today. I want to thank our speakers, Pat and Anthony, for the presentations they've provided. And if you want to attend any future meetings or register for future meetings, IPM.missouri.edu town halls is where you need to go to do that. And we're starting a new month of town halls, and so as we move into June, here's kind of the topics that we're going to be covering in June, starting on June 3rd with Dr. Bailey talking about supplementation with expensive feed prices, and then Dr. Roberts and Dr. Evans are going to be on June 10th talking about ergot potential in grass pastures. Dr. Olson with Kansas State University will be on June 17th talking about biological control, Cerisa leftovisa, and then Tim Schmackenberg, who's an agronomy specialist within the extension in the southwest part of the state, will be on June 24th talking about Johnson grass, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So with that, again, I want to thank you all for being on today, and hopefully we'll see you again next week.